everyone, and welcome back to another episode of my podcast. You know what it's called if you clicked on it, so I don't really have to go into that. I promise someday I'm gonna get better at having an intro, and this is just gonna be my intro from now on. So you guys are just gonna click on it, you're gonna open this, and then you're gonna be like, oh, here's this guy again talking about how he's gonna make an intro and never does. It's just part of the bit, okay? I wasn't gonna record today because this week has kind of been a travesty of a week in a million different capacities, and I don't have time to get into that. Just like teaching is hard, life's hard, grad school is hard, all these other different things that I'm doing are hard. So that's it. Just got a lot today. Like I just got back from a 2 day kind of like tournament back to back situation for speech and debate, which I talked about last time. And I was gonna make it okay that I like took the week off, but then I was like, no, I still have to make up an episode from like a few weeks ago when I missed a week because in my brain, like I have to make as many episodes as I have weeks that I have been doing this. So I was gonna skip this week, and then I realized like, hey, maybe don't because then you'll be 2 weeks behind. The good news is that basically after this week, I'm on spring break because with the way my school schedule is working, I have to go down to a different part of the state to do my labs, and I'm basically staying in a hotel for a week to do like grad school stuff. So I have a little bit extra time, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have like basically a little vacation due to grad school in about a week, and then I have spring break, so I'm gonna have time to like catch up. I'm gonna hopefully film a bunch of episodes of this so I can like get ahead. Imagine like being ahead for once in my life would be super cool. And so I was like, okay, I can just wait until that to like, get ahead and like do things. But then I was sitting there. I was sitting there and thinking about like, it was probably around 7. And I'm recording. You guys don't know what time it is when you're watching this. You don't know what time I'm recording this. So I looked into starting recording it at like 7, and I was screwing around with the audio so much because I wanted to make sure it like sounded okay. Not that it like doesn't sound fine. It's manageable. I just like I want the quality to be as good as I deserve it to be. So anyway, I was screwing around with all of that, and then I was like, okay, and now it's 7:30 because I was taking 30 minutes to kind of like figure out the audio. This is by no means professional. We've already talked about that a million times. However, the goal with it is I do want it to like be good. So anyway, it's 7:30 now, and I'm recording this, and it's Sunday. It's a Sunday night. I'm gonna post it like right after I record it, and you guys are gonna be like, "Why is it posted so late?" And it's like, I'm a person. I don't know, bro. What do you want from me? And as I was saying, I wasn't going to record an episode this week because the next episode I wanted to do after my last one was going to be kind of a little bit more intense. I was feeling like it was going to be time to like talk about some of the things that I've been meaning to talk about on here and kind of like have a longer forum to like explain some things. Especially as I have been talking about my teaching novel that I want, or teaching book that I want to write. So there was like one chapter in there that I was like stuck on about kind of sharing and processing and like, talking about and sharing with God knows however many people are watching this at this point. And I was going to do that. And then like after like the travesty that was this week, I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a week off and just not do it. However, this morning I was sitting in a coffee shop, and I was doing grad school as I like typically do for my Sundays. Like at this point, it's like I work all week, I do a little bit that I can, and then I basically wake up Sunday morning and it's like right to grad school. Like it's literally just like that's my life, especially when I have, tournaments all weekend and stuff. It really is kind of like the energy that is it just needs to happen. So I was doing a discussion board, and somebody posted like a sentence. I'm in counseling. I'm in grad school for counseling. I am in counseling too, or I need to be back in counseling. We don't. I, mm, we, not we. I am in grad school for counseling, so we're learning about. I am taking a class right now called group counseling, and we were talking about like closure. And one of the discussion board topics was talking about like how do you view closure. And this was not my idea. I chose to respond to a different topic, but one of the one of my classmates made a statement in the discussion board that literally like I think it's like actively changing my life as I speak. And the way that I was thinking about it, I was like, "Oh, I could like relate this to teaching in like a second." So that's what I wanted to come on here and say. Like I said, I think this will be a quick episode. I don't imagine that this is gonna take very long for me to like get through, but at least it's like something I can talk about. So with that, let's go ahead and like just jump right into it. So the sentence that he wrote in the discussion board, it says closure is the end of a unique experience. And I'm going to read it again. I'm going to probably read it a bunch of times throughout this episode, but I just want you guys to like know what it is because and have time to sit with it. Closure is the end of a unique experience. It's just one sentence, like 10 words. I'm not actually going to count. I think it's 9. I think it's 8. Closure is the end. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, six, seven. 8 words. Sorry, that took me far too long. I also went for a run today, and I'm exhausted. So you guys didn't ask for any of that. Anyway, the sentence itself. Let me read it again because I got distracted. It says closure is the end of a unique experience. When I read that, I literally like I had to like pause for a second and like really like sit with it. I was like sitting there and in the coffee shop and I was like, damn, what the hell is this sentence doing to me right now? I had just recently this week like seen a TikTok about a teacher saying like, "Hey, isn't it weird that like we spend all this time like getting to know kids and then at the end of the year we're, done with it and we give up and we not give up, but we move on from that and we have this kind of sense of like we build this entire little family for a year and then we say goodbye." And the way that I have always felt as if like I talked about it before, like it's getting easier to say goodbye. I think I mentioned that in one of my earlier episodes, and I have, talked about that in the past. But it's idea of you need this sense of closure in the sense that we end this year after working so hard for these kids, and then we, leave. And the thing that's been hardest for me, especially like having like left a job that I thought I was going to be at for a while, I think it's this idea of closure that like keeps coming back and kind of like the problems with it. So when I read that, I immediately responded and I was like, "Oh my god, this like sentence changed my life." But I mean, I wasn't trying to be like over dramatic or anything, obviously, but the way that I like read that and then immediately began thinking of like, "Oh my god, this is why it's so hard. Like this is why leaving something is so hard. Closure truly is the end of a unique experience because of the idea that we're never going to be able to come back to that. And it's just this like quick little post on a discussion board. But I have not stopped thinking about it. So I was like, that's what I'm going to talk about today. That's what I'm going to talk about today. And I started thinking about like the ending of the year and like what that means for us as teachers and the way that it's like coming up. It's like spring break. So I get into this mindset where, you're trying to figure out what's next for you. You're trying to get ready to like move on. You're trying to get ready to like say goodbye. You're trying to get ready to like really, get on board with what this year's meant and where it's going. And you're hearing all these kids talk about like next year and you're hearing all these kids like talking about like, oh my God, we're almost there. And it's just like this like sadness like hits in my heart every year where the kids are getting older and they're moving on and eventually like they'll be gone. And the fact that you've spent that entire time like trying to build things with them, teach them to like know who they are as a person so you can like better support them in the classroom, right? It is the thing about teaching that is the most impactful moment of every single year, but it's also like the hardest thing in the world to do is to look at a class and say goodbye. And this idea of closure, it is hard because it's like this ending of like a unique experience. Like how are we ever going to say that that group of people will ever be in that same place again? How are we ever going to say that this will be my teacher again, or these will be my classmates, or I will get to know these students in the same way for the rest of their, existence, right? There are, moments that make it a little bit easier. You get like the gifts and you have like the little things that, really encapsulate the year. You have like the finals and the reviews and the hugs and the goodbyes and the letters and all those things, right? But I started thinking about it and it's like it's hard and it's challenging because it is unique, because it won't ever come again, right? It brings up this whole idea of like existentialism in my head, which is like, the idea of you contemplating your existence and then it's like realizing that damn, this really won't ever come again. Like this moment really will not ever be back. And that's what I was sitting with at the coffee shop this morning, like doing grad school. This sentence hit me and I was like, bro, what's happening to me right now? And I haven't stopped thinking about it because I think that is what makes it really hard is we're saying goodbye to this unique experience altogether. What have I done in the past to kind of, you know, tackle this kind of idea is every year at the end of the year, you guys have seen it before. I'm not wearing them right now. But I would make bracelets for my class at the end of every year based on like a saying that I would, say over and over again in the class. And the kids would often like help me pick like, hey, what's something I've like said a lot this year that you think would be like a good encapsulation of like me as your teacher? And a lot of them are like silly. Some of them are memes. Some of them are just like me, you know, being a weirdo. The first one that I ever did said, "See you later, dudes," and that's literally just the first one I've ever done. That one of them says "proud of you" on it. I don't have to go through all of them. If you're interested, slide in, leave a comment, leave a review, tell me something, and I'll interact. And then the reason I did this, right, and the reason I thought about doing that was when I was moving into one of the different places that I had lived in the past, like however many years. And I'm a very like sentimental person, and I have been ever since I was a kid. I just like to hold on to things. It's probably because of this sense of existentialism and this like idea of closure that like even as a kid I was obsessed with. Like I'm a very sentimental person. Like there was this card that I got from the student teacher that was in my classroom in probably the third or fourth, no, third grade. It was in the third grade. And it was this stupid little phrase, and I remember it so well because as a third grader, I was obsessed as a kid, maybe not exactly in third grade, but as a kid, I was obsessed with like putting my drawings and my art all over the wall. Like if you were to walk into my room when I was like up to like 10 years old, probably my bedroom had just pictures on the wall of like things that I've colored and drawn and all these different things, like floor to ceiling. Like I am not kidding, like floor to ceiling covered in just like drawings and art that I did as a kid. When I got into high school, I covered my room in like quotations from, books and stories and anything that I could get my hands on, like covered wall to wall. I would cut them out with like fancy scissors. I would get tape and I would stick it onto my walls. And it was just like this like little area of quotations and stories and drawings and all these different things that I would honestly look at like all the time. But one of the things I had like a little cork board, and I remember when my third grade student teacher left, like we were all sad. Like in third grade, you're like, you grow really attached to people. And third grade was really hard for me. I think I alluded to that before, but it was just this little tiny card, and it came with a pencil. She like tied a little ribbon around it and she put it on a pencil, and it wasn't even like anything deep. It said, "The best way to get rid of an enemy is to make him your friend." I'm not, I wish I had something better that was written on that little card, but it literally said, "The best way to get rid of an enemy is to make him your friend." And I looked at that probably every day for, God, like 8 years of my childhood after my student teacher left before I like took it down and put it into like a box of things that I would save for later. But no, it was literally on a cork board with a tack for the better half of my adulthood, right? A better half of my childhood. And when I was moving recently, a long time ago, when I was moving recently, a long time ago, when I was moving during one of these times when I was teaching, I always had thought about like that impact that a teacher had had on me enough to like I would keep this like little stupid card around, right? That my teacher just found probably somewhere at like a dollar store or, and I'm not saying that just to like make assumptions, but that's just like what teachers would do, right? Like they care enough to like make little gifts. And even in student teaching, I remember on my last day, I did the same thing. I wrote a little paragraph for my entire class of students, and I tied each of them to a pencil. I remember because we had a snow day off, and it was a snow day like right before like I was supposed to be done student teaching for that semester, and I made cookies with the school colors that like kind of mimic the school mascot. I think it was like tiger or something. So I made like these orange cookies with like black stripes that I put dark chocolate over, and I made like probably 300 of them, and I put them in a bunch of boxes. I brought them to school. I made this during a snow day, so it actually worked out really, really well. I made a bunch of cookies, and then in that same vein, I printed out these little cards that said something unique about every single class that I had taught, and I would glue them onto these nice colored papers. I have a picture of this somewhere on the internet when I was doing blogging and things like that. And I I not took pictures. I cut out all these little paragraphs that I made for these kids, and I glued them all on like little individual squares. I hole punched it together, tied a little ribbon around a pencil, and then the next day for student teaching, like my last day, I handed out a cookie and a pencil with that little card to every student. Was it something that they're going to keep around in their on their cork board forever? Maybe. I don't know. Not the cookie, obviously. That's disgusting. Who would keep a cookie for 10 years? Actually, here's some deep lore. Okay, I can't believe I'm telling this story. There's a cookie I made in, I think I had to have been in high school. I had to have been in high school. I went over to my grandma's house with my sister to make cookies we were doing those little Italian cookies. You guys know about pizzelles? They're like these little Italian cookies. They have like the anise flavoring in them. They're like a staple of like Italian cuisine, basically, as far as I am concerned. And we went over to like learn how to do that. And in the meantime, we were also like making some other things. So we made a bunch of shortbread cookies and we rolled them out. And I cut out like a big star. I gave him like a little swoopy haircut that I like had. I gave him like a swoopy haircut and I put a little smile on his face. I called him Toupee. He's a star shaped cookie. And that was probably 15 years ago. I still know exactly where that cookie is in my house. He is on a paper plate, saran wrapped, and has been airtight since that day. And he still exists. He's still around. Like I still have this cookie in my house. So maybe I'll show him. I don't know. Anyway, why was I talking about that? Oh yeah, because I said no one was gonna save a cookie for 10 years, and then I realized that oh yeah, I fucking did. Anyway, so I would pass these out to kids, and at the end of that student teaching year, and I realized that it's like I wanted them to have something to like remember this apparently unique experience. Like closure is the end of a unique experience, right? That's what this whole thing started with, right? And it's this idea that I wanted them to have something that would help them remember where we were and where we came from and where we're going to go, because eventually, we're all going to end up somewhere different. And like I said, the fact that we probably won't ever in that same capacity be in the same room ever again, like it is the ending of this like unique experience, and it really gets you into that mindset of like I want them to like remember. I want to remember, right? Like I want to be a part of that as well. And it gets that like existential thing of like, oh, we're all going to die, and memorizing or remembering all these things that happened is like a really pretty way to move on from things, right? Because that's why closure is hard. That's why being this end of a unique experience, that's why it's hard. It's because it makes us realize our own mortality and our existence is just like really tough. Bet you guys didn't think that you would be getting like a philosophy lesson in the middle of a teaching podcast, but here we are. And I have done since my student teaching thing, I realized that that is like an important thing because like I said, as a kid, and I know not every student I teach is going to be as sentimental as I am, right? But I would print out all those things for these kids. Like it took me all day. I spent my entire snow day like making these little gifts. And even if it didn't mean anything to them, right? Like I have that thing that I can say that I did that they hopefully will keep or stumble upon in 10 years and be like, oh my God, yeah, Mr. Kassick, like that was really cool of him. He was just like a student teacher. And I remember when I was going into student teaching, I was like, I wonder if I will make any sort of impact like that, where like one of my students will have a little phrase that I give them or a little paper I give them that they'll keep on their corkboard in their bedroom and look at all the time just for no reason, right? And it's like moments like that that like really are what teaching is, right? Because for the rest of my teaching career so far, at the end of every year, um, I have given students something to remember that year. In my first year for my when I taught sixth grade and eighth grade, that maybe I didn't do this for my eighth graders, but that first eighth grade class, like I talked about, they'll remember that class because that class was like perfect in all its capacities, the most perfect class I've ever had. Like I can't explain it. But for my sixth graders that year, we did the compliments project. If you guys haven't heard about it, you can probably Google it, and I think it shows up with something. But it's this idea of you put like a big piece of paper behind like a student, and they aren't allowed to look. You play like a couple of songs. The kids aren't allowed to like look behind them as everyone else is going up. Like pick like one student a day. They sit in a stool in front of this big piece of paper, and the rest of the class goes up and they write really nice things about that person. I think I've talked about like my paper plates activity that I've done before. Maybe I haven't, but it's the same idea where you have this giant piece of paper now with all these really nice things that, you know, students in your class have to say about you, and kids would roll them up and take them home. And were they all like perfect? I don't want to sit here and say like every kid had an amazing experience with that because, they're in middle school and middle school is tough for a lot of reasons, right? But I did that my first year. Starting my second year, I started making those little bracelets at the end of every year. And with what I did there is basically I would give every kid a bracelet. I went onto like some website that looks kind of like more sketchy than it actually is. And I would design those little like silicone bracelets that were like really hip when I was in high school in like the 2010s era. And that was a way that I would be able to hand something to kids at the end of the year that like one, it's like a phrase that I said, it says my name on it, says the school year. And I would hand that out to kids at the end of the year every year. With those little bracelets, I was also like, this doesn't mean enough. Like this isn't enough for me to like say how much I am impacted by them. In my first year, I was like, what if I wrote like an individual like letter for every student because, after having gotten out of college and like moved around a lot, like I said, like I would stumble upon these things that my teachers gave to me. Like I would look through yearbooks and I would recognize like that they would leave these little things, like these little moments of our unique experiences together. And those meant like so much to me, right? Like being the highly sentimental person that I am, like looking back on like a yearbook thing someone wrote, or a little gift a teacher would give me, or, that little card from my third grade student teacher. Like, who would have thought that, anyway, so at the end of my first year, I was like, what if I did that same thing? And I wrote individualized letters. This time it was a letter per student. It wasn't just like a little paragraph for the class. I wrote an individual letter for every student. I have pictures of this somewhere too. I taught 3 classes at the time. They were blocks, so I taught like 6 periods a day, but like there was only 3 classes because it was blocks. So like 80 something kids, 90 something kids, which is a not a high amount of kids to have each year. Like I understand that, and I know that there's privilege there that not all teachers get all the time. That said, I did handwrite 90 something letters that year to each student, front and back, and I put a picture of our class on it. And I went to Target, I think, and I printed out like 3x5s, not 3x5s, six, I don't know, 6x5s maybe. Like just like little film that I would, I took a picture on my phone of us as a class one time for our Google Classroom background. And I also have this thing at the end of the year, which I'll get into that later. And I printed that out, glued it onto the page, wrote a little letter to each kid about like, them and like thank you and all that sort of thing. It was handwritten. I signed it at the end, and on the last day of school, I would hand out the letters and I would hand out the bracelets. And I did that my first year, and like seeing like the impact that that had and like how cool it was for them to like walk away with something, I kept doing that. And my second year, I got a little smarter and I typed everything and I printed it. I printed it, laminated it. I printed it, I typed it, printed it, laminated it, and then gave it to kids. That's like a lot of, I don't know. It felt like a whole thing. It would take me like 3 days to do all of this, and I would like plan it out specifically. There was one year, I think it was my first year I did this. I also gave quotes for each kid because I'm obsessed with quotes, and I still was. But I gave a quote for each kid, and I put that on their little letter and typed up my letter to them, added some pictures of the year that we had together through like field trips, soccer games, class pictures. Like I would put like however many pictures we had together just like on there. And then I would give that to him at the end of the year. And then, for the rest of however many years I was at that school, at least, I don't know. I haven't figured out what I'm doing this year yet because it's like a new place and no one's expecting anything. So I have a chance to like switch it up a little bit. But the idea was that at the end of every year, and I did that for what I taught at that school for 8 years. I did that for 8 years. And that moment of closure always felt like something I needed as well to like say goodbye because, like I said, at the end of a school year, like you spend all this time like getting to know these kids and in your classroom, and it's like this one unique experience that will never probably be back again. And it was really important for me to remember it in a way that was special, and I wanted them to remember it in a way that was special. So with all of that, I would open the last day of school and I would say, "Hey guys, like it's time for the gifts." And eventually last year like kids kind of expected it because I would talk about it all the time, and they would like, through the grapevine they would hear, and it's like, "Oh yeah, Kassick's going to write you like this really cool letter and he's going to give you a bracelet." And, it became like a tradition that kids knew about and expected in my class. And that was a really cool thing to just have created and been a part of. I'm getting really sad. Um so yeah, so I would do that at the end of every year, and I would always preface it by saying like, "Hey guys, like this is something that I like to do to, encapsulate kind of our year together." And I would always say like, "Hey, everyone's letter is not the same. My personal, relationship with you guys is different. Your interactions with me are different throughout the year. Your personalities are different. So your letter might not mean that much to you if I'm being completely honest. Like for me, it's like it was really hard for me sometimes to, you know, write a letter for a kid that I had a great relationship with, and then a kid that I like wish I had a better relationship with, and then like pass out notes that I wanted to have impacted them. I don't know. There was always like a weird disparity there to me where it's like I wanted every kid to get a letter that meant the world to them, but I don't always know if that was the case, right? Because I would try to explain to kids that difference where it's like every relationship is different. So as you're looking around the room, like people are going to react differently, And, every year someone would cry. Every year, I would have like a little moment with some kids. Every year, like kids would react differently. I remember, I think I talked about this before, but there was a year that like everyone was crying. We were all sitting in a circle and I passed these out. And because that was like the one class that I had, this was when they were in seventh grade. They like just graduated last year, where Infinity War Endgame came out that year. And it was the I Love You 3000. And it was like that last week of school where kids finally realized that like it was ending. I have never had a class of students for a whole last week of school like cry so much as that class did when they were, thinking about like, oh my God, we're never going to be in this room together. We're never going to have the same class again. Like, those were kids at the time that understand that closure is the end of a unique experience. And we sat in a circle and like everyone was crying and passing these things out. And I'm not, I, I don't always love like telling this story to people because they always have this idea of like, oh, you're just like, oh, you're super cool. Like, that's awesome. Like, wow, you must think you're super great and awesome. And like, I'm glad, like, I'm not saying these things to like, I'm not saying these things in like a bragging kind of way. Like, I'm not trying to say like, oh, everyone needs to do this. Or I'm not saying that like, this is something that every teacher should aspire to do. And if you don't do this, like, you're a terrible teacher. Like, that's not the point, right? The point is that it's like, teaching does get you to care this much. And the way that I needed to show that and the way that I needed to remember that was through this process, right? Like, every teacher has their own version of this, whether it's like, hey, see you next year. Thanks so much. Or whether it's like, hey guys, thanks for a great year. Like, there's all these kind of different forms of closure, but every good teacher I know has a moment like this at the end of the year where it's like it's sad to like say goodbye. Even if it's sad to say goodbye to one kid, it's that ending of this very unique experience that we all shared together that, is it just is different, right? And then, not to mention last year when I was leaving 8 years of an experience, right? That last day of school, I like cried so much. And I've said that before. I have said that before, but it's just that whole experience of I needed the closure. Like, I needed to say my goodbyes that day in a certain way. I needed to pass out these letters. I needed these things to go that way because that is what teaching is. And people don't really realize that about this profession, where it's like you build this little core group of people and you really start to care about them and they start to care about each other too, right? Like, this isn't just a me to them thing or a them to me thing. This is an everyone thing. This is a community thing. And then to just like, okay, great, see you later, like, maybe never again, that's an impossible thing. And maybe, like I said, you'll go get coffee with them, or maybe you'll see them at the store, or you know maybe you'll hear about them on the news, or maybe they'll get rich and famous. I'm still banking on one of my old students to get rich and famous, so you guys know where to find me, okay? And maybe you'll hear stories through the grapevine, or any of these things will give you a different kind of closure. But the closure that you get at the end of the year is sometimes all you get. And it's that acknowledgement of the end of the unique experience that I always felt was like a really important thing as a teacher to provide for my students. And I think I think I've said everything that I was thinking about with this. Um, there was something that I said at the beginning that I was like, oh, I'll get into that. I'm going to remember the second I stop recording because I don't remember the thing I was supposed to remember. It's like in Harry Potter, when Neville holds like the remembrall and it's turned red because he forgets something. And he's like, yeah, but I can't remember what I've forgotten. And it's like, bro, like that's actually so me. Like, that's me right now. Like, I'm Neville. Maybe I'll have a glow up like him. Maybe I'll have a glow up like him someday, you guys. This is my glow up era. Anyway, I think I've said all that I wanted to say about this. And I think I wanted it to be a short episode, so it's only like 30 minutes, maybe a little less. But the idea is, as teachers, we all have to kind of eventually get to this point, because if you are a good teacher, you are going to care about your students, and saying goodbye to them is going to be hard every single year. And I think about that fact every single day. And the way that I counter that is, sometimes I'll just like sit in my room, and I did this at last year. I've done this for like every year. Once I started to realize like how much I really like begin to care, is sometimes I'll just like sit in my room at my desk, or I'll be sitting on the floor reading to a student, or I will be, really struggling with helping someone with math homework, or I'll be sitting in a speech and debate tournament. I'll be judging for 9 rounds, you guys, I did this weekend. Or I'll be, sitting in wherever it is in the classroom. I'll be sitting in like even a meeting, goddamn, and I'll just like look around. And I've gotten really good at this because kids have started to notice. But I'll just sit there and I'll take like I'll glance around the room, and I really try to just like soak it in, because I've come to realize that like I might never get to experience that again. And it's in those moments I'm like trying to provide closure to myself, because I'm realizing that like this unique experience will end. And the more that I can sit in it and soak it up and exist within it for a while before it's over, I try really hard to like take those moments where I can, even in the most like challenging of times. I really try to just like sit there, look around a little bit, and recognize like where we're at and how much it matters. And yeah, I I feel like I wanted to say something else there, but I feel really good about this. I have loved talking about this, because like I said, it's like this is the hardest part about teaching, but is also the best part about teaching, knowing that like you had this little unique experience that you guys get to feel sad about. Like imagine the privilege of feeling sad that something is ending. You know what I mean? And with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Please leave a review, leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe, do all the things. And I'm super proud of you. Follow me on all my socials, slide into my DM, start some conversations. Very excited that I'm still actively working on creating this, even though it sometimes gets exhausting. But then I, finish and I feel really good about it. So anyway, thanks so much. Super proud of you. I'll see you in the next one.